The antique mirror arrived at 11:47 p.m. I should have refused it. Rule number 1 at midnight pawn. Nothing comes through those doors after 11 without the owner's written approval. But the woman's hands were shaking, blood under her fingernails. The mirror wrapped in what looked like a funeral shroud. "Please," she whispered. "It has to be tonight." The glass was black as Vegas asphalt, not reflecting black, consuming black, like staring into a mine shaft that went straight to hell. I touched the frame. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Every light in the shop flickered. The security cameras went static. And in that mirror's surface, something moved. Not my reflection, something else. The woman pressed a crumpled 20 into my palm. Her skin felt like ice. "Follow the rules," she said. "All of them. Even the ones they don't tell you about." She was gone before I could ask what that meant. I stood alone with the mirror. The shop's neon sign buzzed overhead, casting red shadows across the glass. The smell of ozone and burnt copper filled the air. That's when I noticed the envelope taped to the back. Inside, 13 handwritten rules. Some in ink, some in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. Rule 1, never look directly into the mirror after midnight. Rule 7, if you hear singing, cover the mirror immediately. Rule 13, if the mirror shows you someone you know, they're already dead. I checked my watch. 11:59 p.m. The mirror's surface rippled like black water. A face began to form in the glass. Pale, familiar, smiling. My face, but I wasn't smiling. The clock struck midnight. In that moment, I realized the truth about Midnight Pawn. We don't just buy and sell forgotten treasures. We're the last stop for things that shouldn't exist. Things that people are desperate to get rid of. Things that come with rules written in blood. The mirror showed me my reflection one more time. Then it showed me something else, something that made me understand why that woman's hands were shaking, why her fingernails were bloody, and why she needed it to be tonight. But what I saw in that mirror wasn't just my death. It was everyone's Las Vegas, the city where fortunes are made and lost in a single roll of dice, where desperate souls trade their most precious possessions for one more chance at redemption. But beneath the neon glitter and slot machine symphonies lies a darker economy, an ancient trade that predates the casinos by millennia. Pawn shops. These modern temples of desperation have existed since the Roman Empire, places where the desperate meet the opportunistic, where family heirlooms become gambling money, where wedding rings transform into rent payments. In Las Vegas, this trade takes on a particularly sinister quality. The city's pawn shops see more human misery per square foot than anywhere else on Earth. Addicts pawning their children's toys. Wives secretly selling their jewelry to feed their husband's poker addiction. Tourists trading their return flight tickets for one more pull of the lever. But Golden Sands Pawn, tucked away on a forgotten street behind the Strip, operates differently. Very differently. The smell of desperation here is thicker, more metallic, like copper pennies mixed with fear sweat and something else. Something older. The fluorescent lights buzz with an electrical hunger that seems to feed on the transactions below. Each desperate exchange, each soul-crushing negotiation. This is where moral boundaries blur into profitable gray areas, where the line between helping and exploitation becomes razor-thin, where the ancient question echoes through every transaction: how much is a human soul actually worth? The pawn industry generates over $6 billion annually in the United States alone. But Golden Sands Pawn operates by rules that would make even the most hardened loan sharks uncomfortable. Rules written in a leather-bound book that smells of sulfur and old blood. rules that employees must follow without question, rules that seem designed not just to maximize profit, but to harvest something far more valuable than money. 3 weeks ago, a young man walked through those doors seeking employment. He thought he understood desperation. He thought he knew the price of survival in Las Vegas. He was wrong. The temperature inside Golden Sands Pawn always sits at exactly 66 degrees. The cash register never makes the same sound twice, and every customer leaves behind something they didn't intend to sell, but the real horror hadn't even begun. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like dying insects as I counted the day's receipts. Vegas pawn shops see everything: desperate gamblers, broken dreams, stolen goods disguised as family heirlooms. But nothing prepared me for what walked through my door at 11:47 p.m. The woman appeared ordinary at first glance. Mid-30s, designer clothes that screamed money, perfectly manicured nails clutching a vintage hand mirror. The kind of antique that usually meant easy profit. "I need to sell this tonight," she whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the suddenly frigid air. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees the moment she entered. I reached for the mirror, remembering Frank's first rule: never accept mirrors after dark. I'd laughed when he told me. Superstitious old fool, I thought. The ornate silver frame felt ice cold against my palms. Victorian era, maybe 1880s, worth at least $3,000 to the right collector. My fingers traced the intricate engravings: roses twisted with thorns, cherubs with hollow eyes. "Beautiful piece," I said, lifting it toward the light. That's when I saw them. In the reflection, standing directly behind the woman, were 3 figures in period dress. A man in a top hat, his face a mass of writhing shadows. 2 children, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes nothing but black voids. The woman wasn't casting a reflection at all. My hands trembled as I slowly lowered the mirror. The figures remained visible in the glass, growing closer, their shadow fingers reaching toward the surface. "They've been following me for weeks," the woman said, her voice now carrying the weight of centuries. "Ever since I took this from the estate sale. They want to come through." The mirror's surface began to ripple like disturbed water. The temperature plummeted further. My breath came in sharp puffs as frost spread across the glass display cases. "The previous owner warned me," she continued, backing toward the door. "Mirrors are doorways. Some doors should never be opened after sunset." The shadow man's hand pressed against the glass from the inside. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. "Keep it," she gasped, throwing a wad of cash on the counter. "Maybe you'll have better luck." She vanished into the neon-soaked Vegas night, leaving me alone with the mirror. The cracks spread wider. Something dark and ancient stirred behind the glass. That's when I understood Frank's rules weren't superstition. They were survival. But the real horror hadn't even begun. Mr. Chen appeared at closing time on my 3rd week, not through the front door, not through the back. I turned around from counting the register, and he was simply there, standing between the jewelry cases like he'd materialized from the shadows themselves. The smell hit me first: sandalwood and something metallic that made my teeth ache. "You've been following the rules," he said. His voice carried the weight of decades, each word deliberate as a chess move. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. The fluorescent lights above us hummed with an electric tension that raised the hair on my arms. "Good. But you don't understand why they exist." Mr. Chen moved closer. His footsteps made no sound on the worn linoleum, but I could feel the temperature drop with each step. The air grew thick, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. "This building sits on old ground," he continued, "before the neon, before the casinos, Before Vegas became the city of dreams and broken promises, his fingers traced the edge of the glass counter. Where he touched, frost appeared, delicate patterns that shouldn't exist in the Nevada heat. The Paiute called this place the hungry earth. They knew what slept beneath. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss his words as the rambling of an old man, but the wedding ring in my pocket had grown ice cold. The same ring that had whispered my name 3 nights running. The rules aren't arbitrary, Mr. Chen said. They're a barrier, a contract written in ritual and repetition. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather journal, its pages yellow with age. The cover bore symbols that hurt to look at directly, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't focusing. Every item that passes through these doors carries memory, pain, desperation. The rules ensure those memories stay contained. The journal fell open in his hands. I glimpsed pages filled with handwriting in multiple languages, photographs of objects I recognized from our inventory, and dates stretching back over a century. Break the rules, and you break the barrier. Mr. Chen's eyes met mine. In their depths, I saw something ancient stirring, something that had been waiting patiently in the darkness beneath Las Vegas. And when that happens, the hungry earth remembers how to feed. He closed the journal with a sound like breaking bones. Then he smiled. But you're a good employee. You follow instructions. The lights flickered once. When they steadied, Mr. Chen was gone, but the journal remained on the counter, still warm from his touch. And inside, I could hear something scratching. The customer walked in at 11:47 p.m., 3 minutes before we should have locked the doors. I should have turned him away. Rule number 1 was absolute. No customers after midnight. But Marcus had stepped out for his smoke break, and the man's Rolex caught the fluorescent light like a beacon. $20,000 easy. My commission alone would cover rent for 3 months. The stranger moved wrong. Too fluid. Too quiet. His footsteps made no sound on our creaking linoleum, and when he breathed, the air around him seemed to grow colder. I need to sell something, he whispered, his voice carrying despite the volume. My skin prickled. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to point at the clock, to follow the rules that had kept this pawn shop running for 60 years. But greed is a powerful drug in Las Vegas. What do you have? He reached into his coat, a movement that should have been simple, but felt like watching someone reach into a grave. The object he withdrew defied immediate description. It looked like jewelry, ancient silver twisted into patterns that hurt to follow with your eyes. The metal was warm despite the night air, and it pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Family heirloom, he said. Needs a new home. The moment I touched it, the temperature in the shop dropped 10 degrees. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting dancing shadows that moved independently of their sources. Behind the counter, our security cameras began recording static. That's when I noticed his reflection in the glass display case. There wasn't one. My hand shook as I set the piece on the velvet pad we used for expensive items. The fabric began to smoke where the silver touched it, filling the air with the smell of burning hair and something else, something organic and wrong. How much? I managed to ask. He smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. No money, he said. Just safekeeping, until someone worthy comes to claim it. I should have refused, should have thrown him out, should have remembered that some rules exist for reasons beyond profit margins and customer service. Instead, I wrote up the ticket. The moment his signature touched the paper, every light in the pawn shop went out. In the darkness, I heard him whisper something in a language that predated English, predated Latin, predated human speech. entirely. When the emergency lighting kicked in 30 seconds later, he was gone. But the jewelry remained, pulsing on its velvet bed like a metallic heart. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, 7 customers have asked about that specific piece. None of them were human. The antique mirror arrived on a Tuesday. I should have known better. Rule Junker 7 clearly states, never accept mirrors older than 50 years without checking the back first. But the woman who brought it in was desperate. Her hands shook as she placed the ornate silver frame on my counter. The glass was black with age, reflecting nothing but shadows. "My grandmother's," she whispered, "from the old country. I need the money." The mirror felt cold. Too cold for Vegas heat. The silver frame bore intricate carvings. Faces twisted in silent screams. My skin crawled as I traced the patterns. "How much?" she asked. I offered 300. She took it without negotiating. That night, I stayed late to catalog new inventory. The mirror sat propped against the wall, watching. Every time I glanced at it, my reflection looked wrong, older, sadder, like it was showing me something I wasn't ready to see. Then I heard the whispers, soft at first, like wind through broken glass. But wind doesn't speak names. Wind doesn't know your secrets. "Marcus." I spun around. The shop was empty, just me and rows of forgotten treasures. But the mirror was different now. The black glass had cleared, revealing a perfect reflection of the shop, except I wasn't alone in it. A figure stood behind me, tall, gaunt, wearing clothes from another century. His eyes were holes. His mouth moved without sound. I turned. Nothing there. Looked back at the mirror. The figure was closer now, close enough to touch my shoulder. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Rule number 8. Some reflections show the past, others show what's coming. There was no rule number 8. I'd memorized all 7 rules when I started working here. But as I stared at my phone, new words appeared on the screen. Rule number 9. When the mirror shows you death, it's already too late. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in clouds. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Marcus, look behind you." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. In the mirror, the figure reached out with skeletal fingers. Then I understood. The woman who sold me the mirror. I'd seen her face before, in the obituaries. She'd died 3 weeks ago, but the real horror hadn't even begun. The old man's fingers trembled as he placed the ornate music box on my counter. His eyes darted to the security cameras, then back to me. The smell of mothballs and fear clung to his weathered coat. "I need you to understand something, son," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the shop's humming fluorescent lights. "This belonged to my grandmother. She worked the old casinos back in the 50s. The music box was beautiful, carved mahogany with silver inlays that caught the harsh overhead lighting. But something felt wrong about it. Cold, heavy, like it was pulling heat from the air around it. She told me stories," the old man continued, his knuckles white as he gripped the counter. "About the rules, about what happens when you break them." I felt my stomach tighten. Rule number 12 echoed in my mind. Some items carry more than memories. "What kind of stories?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. The old man's laugh was bitter, hollow. "The kind that keep you awake at night. The kind that make you check your locks twice before bed." He leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. The scent of stale coffee and desperation made me want to step back. There was a collector, rich man from California, came through Vegas in '73, buying up everything from the old casinos. Chips, cards, personal effects from the dealers. The music box seemed to grow heavier on the counter. I could swear I heard something moving inside it, like tiny gears turning. He bought this from my grandmother for $5,000. Cash. More money than she'd ever seen. The old man's eyes went distant, unfocused. 3 days later, they found him in his hotel room. Door locked from the inside. No signs of struggle, but his face... He shuddered. His face was frozen in this expression of pure terror. My hands were shaking now. The shop felt colder, smaller. The walls seemed to press in around us. The police returned his purchases to the families. My grandmother got this back. She never opened it again, never wound it up, never let the music play. He pushed the music box toward me with one finger, as if afraid to touch it fully. I need the money, son. But I need you to promise me something. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Once. Twice. Promise me you'll follow the rules, whatever they are in this place, because some things are worth more than money. That's when I heard it, a soft, tinkling melody coming from inside the music box. But no one had wound it up. The fluorescent lights hummed their electric lullaby as Marcus settled into his third consecutive night shift. Rule number 12 echoed in his mind. Never acknowledge the sounds after midnight. But how do you ignore what's impossible to miss? The first tap came at 12:17 a.m. A gentle percussion against the bulletproof glass, like fingernails drumming impatiently. Marcus kept his eyes on the security monitors, watching empty streets bathed in neon pink and electric blue. Tap, tap, tap. The sound grew more insistent, more deliberate, the kind of rhythm that burrows into your skull and sets up permanent residence. His predecessor, Jimmy, had lasted 6 months before they found him in the back room. Catatonic, mumbling about visitors who came when the city slept. The official report blamed a nervous breakdown, but Marcus knew better now. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched like a held breath, thick and suffocating in the recycled air. The smell of old leather and tarnished silver hung heavy, mixed with something else, something metallic and wrong. Then came the whispers, not through the glass, not from outside, from the items themselves. The vintage wedding ring in case 7 hummed with desperate longing. The antique music box clicked its broken melody, telling stories of children who never came home. Each pawned possession carried its owner's desperation like a virus. Marcus pressed his palms against his ears, but the voices grew louder. A symphony of abandoned dreams and broken promises, all crying out for acknowledgement. Rule 12 wasn't about ignoring sounds. It was about ignoring souls. Every item in Vegas Gold Pawn carried more than monetary value. They carried pieces of people, fragments of lives destroyed by the city's merciless appetite for hope and cash. The woman who pawned her grandmother's necklace to pay rent. The father who traded his watch for his daughter's medicine. The gambler who surrendered his wedding ring for one more chance at redemption. Their desperation soaked into metal and stone like blood into fabric. Marcus understood now why the previous employees never lasted. It wasn't the night shift that broke them. It wasn't even the strange rules. It was the weight of carrying everyone else's ghosts. The tapping resumed, more urgent now, more demanding, as if something outside knew he was finally listening. Finally understanding the true nature of his job. He reached for the phone to call his supervisor. Then he saw the reflection in the security monitor. He wasn't alone in the store. The clock strikes midnight in the pawn shop. Rule number 7. Never count the items after closing. But tonight, Marcus has no choice. The district manager is coming tomorrow and the books don't match. 3 items are missing from the system, but somehow still sitting on the shelves. The fluorescent lights hum overhead like dying insects. Each bulb flickers with a different rhythm, casting dancing shadows across rows of forgotten treasures. Marcus starts with Section A, wedding rings that never made it to altars. Each one tells a story of broken promises. He counts 1, 2, 3. The temperature drops 10 degrees between numbers. Section B holds the watches, Rolexes, Omegas, Timexes, all stopped at different times. Marcus notices something he's never seen before. They're all ticking in perfect synchronization now. Tick, 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 like a heartbeat. His breath fogs in the suddenly frigid air. The smell of old metal and desperation grows stronger, mixed with something else. Something rotting. Section C, electronics. But the TVs are all displaying the same image, security footage of the shop. From tonight, showing Marcus counting inventory, but in the screens he's not alone. Shadowy figures stand behind him in each frame. Watching. Waiting. Marcus spins around. The shop is empty. He looks back at the screens. The figures are closer now. His hands shake as he continues counting. 47, 48. The cash register drawer slides open by itself. Inside, instead of money, are photographs. Black and white pictures of every customer who's ever pawned something here. But their eyes have been scratched out. Every single one. The photos are warm to the touch, like they've been held by living hands. The smell of sulfur fills his nostrils. Marcus realizes why Rule 7 exists. The midnight inventory isn't about counting objects. It's about counting souls. Each item in this shop carries a piece of its former owner. Their desperation, their broken dreams, their last hope before they walked through these doors. And at midnight, they all come back. The temperature plummets further. Ice crystals form on the windows. The ticking of the synchronized watches grows louder, faster. Marcus backs toward the door, but his feet won't move. Something invisible holds him in place. The TVs flicker. In the security footage, the shadowy figures are now standing directly behind him. He can feel their cold breath on his neck. Then he hears the whisper, "Your turn to be counted." But the real horror hadn't even begun. The old man's fingers traced the glass case like he was reading Braille. Marcus watched from behind the counter, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Rule 7 echoed in his mind. Never let the collector touch anything twice. The man had been here 3 times this week. Same navy suit, same silver briefcase, same dead eyes that seemed to catalog every item in the shop. That music box, the collector whispered, his breath fogging the glass. It belonged to the Hendersons, didn't it? Marcus's throat went dry. The Hendersons had vanished 6 months ago. Their house sat empty, but somehow their belongings kept appearing in the shop's inventory. No one talked about where they came from. "I wouldn't know, sir," Marcus managed. The collector smiled. His teeth were too white, too perfect. "Of course you wouldn't. You just follow the rules." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows across the pawnshop floor. The smell of old leather and desperation hung thick in the recycled air. "Tell me, Marcus," the collector continued, still staring at the music box, "do you ever wonder what happens to the people who break the rules?" Marcus's hand instinctively moved toward the panic button under the counter. But Rule 12 was absolute. Never call for help when the collector visits. "I follow the rules," Marcus repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The collector turned then, his pale eyes boring into Marcus's soul. Smart boy. The last employee thought he was clever, thought he could bend the rules just a little. The temperature in the shop seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What happened to him?" Marcus asked, though every instinct screamed not to. The collector's smile widened. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small glass jar. Inside, something dark and wet floated in murky liquid. He became part of the inventory. Marcus's stomach lurched. The jar looked exactly like the ones lined up in the back room, the ones he was never supposed to open, never supposed to question, the ones that sometimes seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. "The rules exist for a reason, Marcus," the collector said, placing the jar gently on the counter. "They protect you from becoming merchandise." The front door chimed as another customer entered, but when Marcus looked up from the jar, the collector was gone. The new customer approached the counter with a familiar navy briefcase, but this time the briefcase was open. The smell hit me first. Sweet copper mixed with desert dust, seeping through the back room's cracked door. Rule 7 was simple. Never enter the storage room after midnight. Never question what's kept there, but Marcus had broken it. I found him slumped against the metal shelving, his face pale as casino chips. Blood trickled from his nose, staining his uniform shirt dark crimson. "What did you see?" I whispered, kneeling beside him. His eyes rolled back, showing only white. When he spoke, his voice wasn't his own, deeper, older, carrying the weight of decades. The collectors came for their debts. The storage room door creaked wider on its own. Inside, shadows moved between the shelves like liquid smoke. Items we'd never logged sat in perfect rows. Wedding rings still warm to the touch, watches that ticked backwards, photographs that showed different faces each time you looked. Marcus grabbed my wrist with fingers cold as morgue steel. "They're not just pawning objects," he gasped. "They're pawning memories, pieces of souls. The shop. It's a collection point." The fluorescent lights above us flickered, casting everything in sickly green pulses. Each flash revealed more impossible inventory. A child's teddy bear that whispered lullabies in languages that predated civilization. A mirror that reflected rooms we'd never seen. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. Marcus tried to smile, but blood filled the gaps between his teeth. "Since Vegas was built on bones, kid. Since the first casino opened its doors. Every bet placed, every life ruined. It all ends up here eventually." The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in white puffs as something massive shifted in the storage room's depths. "The owner never told us what we were really guarding," Marcus continued, his grip tightening. "We're not pawnbrokers. We're custodians of the damned." Footsteps echoed from the front of the shop. Slow, deliberate, accompanied by the jingle of keys. The owner was returning. Marcus's eyes focused on mine with sudden clarity. "Rule 8, he whispered urgently. "There's a Rule 8 they never told you about." The footsteps stopped just outside our door. "When the owner comes back after midnight, you have exactly 60 seconds to decide. Become part of the collection or take his place." The door handle turned with a sound like breaking bones. But what walked through that door wasn't human anymore. The smell of old leather and cigarette smoke clung to everything in Mr. Chen's office. I'd been working at Desert Gold Pawn for 6 months, following the strange rules without question. Never open the black safe after midnight. Never ask about the items in the red-tagged section. Never, ever go into the basement alone. But tonight, Chen was gone. "Emergency family business," he'd said. His keys sat heavy in my palm, cold metal against sweating skin. The basement door had always been locked. Customers would glance at it nervously, then look away. Some would leave without buying anything, just from seeing that door. I descended the narrow stairs. Each step creaked like breaking bones. The air grew thick, metallic, like pennies and fear. The basement wasn't storage, it was a shrine. Photographs covered every wall. Hundreds of them. Customers who'd brought in jewelry, electronics, family heirlooms. But these weren't security photos. These were taken in their homes, while they slept. My hands trembled as I moved closer. Each photo had a date, an address, and a number written in red ink. The numbers matched prices from our sales receipts. Then I saw my own apartment building, my bedroom window, my face, peaceful in sleep, taken 3 nights ago. The red number beneath read $50,000. I wasn't an employee. I was inventory. The rules suddenly made perfect sense. The black safe contained contracts. The red-tagged items were personal belongings of people who'd disappeared. The basement was where Chen planned our fates. Every customer who walked through our doors was being evaluated, not for their pawned items, but for their worth on a different kind of market. I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd pawned her wedding ring last month. She hadn't been back. Her photo was in the sold section. The Martinez family who'd brought in their TV. Gone. The college kid with the guitar. Missing. Las Vegas wasn't just about gambling with money. Some people gambled with lives. I grabbed my photo, stuffing it into my pocket. The paper felt like ice against my fingers. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. Footsteps echoed from upstairs. Chen was back early. I ran for the stairs, but the basement door slammed shut above me. The lock clicked with finality. In the darkness, I heard Chen's voice through the floorboards. "Welcome home," he whispered, but the real horror hadn't even begun. The smell of burning sage couldn't mask what I discovered in Marcus's office that night. Hidden beneath his desk, a leather-bound ledger revealed the truth. Every cursed item we'd collected wasn't being stored for safety. They were being sold. To the highest bidders. Wealthy collectors who craved the darkness these objects carried. The Victorian mourning locket that drove 3 customers to madness sold for $50,000 to a private estate in Switzerland. The Civil War surgeon's bone saw that whispered death threats. Shipped to a museum curator in Tokyo for $75,000. My hands trembled as I flipped through pages of transactions. Hundreds of cursed artifacts. Millions in profits. The temperature in the office dropped 20 degrees. Marcus had been running a supernatural auction house, using our pawn shop as a front. Every rule he'd taught me, every protection ritual, every warning about the cursed collection, all lies to keep me compliant. You weren't supposed to find that. I spun around. Marcus stood in the doorway, his usual warmth replaced by something cold and calculating. "The rules," I whispered. "The protection spells. You said they were to keep us safe." He stepped closer, and I noticed the glint of silver around his neck. An amulet I'd never seen before, pulsing with dark energy. "They were to keep you safe," he said. "The cursed objects feed on fear, on suffering. But they also generate incredible power for those who know how to harvest it." The walls seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Every cursed item we'd ever handled had left traces, and Marcus had been collecting that residual darkness. The customers who went insane, I realized. You knew what would happen. Necessary sacrifices. His voice carried no remorse. Their suffering charges the objects, makes them more valuable to the right buyers. The ledger slipped from my numb fingers. For months, I'd believed I was protecting Las Vegas from supernatural threats. Instead, I'd been feeding them to monsters wearing human faces. "Rule number 1, Marcus smiled, and his teeth seemed sharper than before. Never trust the person who makes the rules. The office door slammed shut behind him. The lights went out, and in the darkness I heard the whispers of every cursed object we'd ever touched, calling my name. But the real horror wasn't the supernatural marketplace Marcus had created. It was realizing I'd been the perfect bait all along. The basement beneath Goldstein's pawn shop smelled of copper pennies and forgotten years. Marcus descended the creaking wooden stairs, each step echoing like a funeral bell in the cramped space below. Dust particles danced in the single bulb's yellow glow. The temperature dropped 10 degrees with each step downward. Old Man Goldstein waited at the bottom, his weathered hands clutching a leather-bound ledger that looked older than the city itself. The book's pages were yellowed with age, edges crumbling like ancient parchment. "You've been asking about the rules," Goldstein whispered, his voice barely audible above the building's settling groans. "Time you learned why they exist." Marcus felt his throat tighten. The basement walls seemed to press closer, lined with shelves of items that had never seen the shop floor above. Jewelry that gleamed too brightly in the dim light. Photographs of people whose eyes seemed to follow his movement. "This pawn shop opened in 1952, Goldstein began, opening the ledger with trembling fingers. "But the agreement, that's much older." The pages revealed handwritten entries in languages Marcus couldn't identify. Some looked like Latin. Others resembled symbols he'd seen carved into the shop's foundation stones. "Every item that comes through our doors carries a piece of someone's soul," Goldstein continued. "Their desperation, their hope, their last resort before losing everything." Marcus watched the old man's finger trace a particular entry dated 1847. The ink looked fresh, despite the century-old date. "The rules aren't just guidelines, Marcus. They're a contract. A binding agreement with forces that predate this desert, this city, this country." The basement air grew thick, almost suffocating. Marcus could taste metal on his tongue like blood from a bitten lip. "What kind of forces?" Marcus managed to ask. Goldstein's eyes reflected the bulb's light like polished coins. "The kind that collect debts across lifetimes. The kind that remember every broken promise, every desperate bargain made in the darkness of financial ruin." He turned another page. Marcus glimpsed names, dates, and what looked like payment schedules stretching decades into the future. "Every pawnshop employee signs this ledger," Goldstein said, producing an antique fountain pen. "Every employee becomes part of the collection process." The pen felt ice-cold against Marcus's palm. The basement walls seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. "But what happens if someone breaks the rules?" Marcus whispered. Goldstein smiled, but his eyes remained dead serious. "Then you become inventory yourself." The night Marcus decided to break Rule 7, the pawn shop felt different. The fluorescent lights buzzed with an electric hunger. The air tasted metallic, like copper pennies dissolving on your tongue. Rule 7 was simple. Never open the back room after midnight. But the customer had offered $12,000 cash for what was inside. $12,000 for a single item that had been gathering dust for 3 years. Marcus's hands trembled as he turned the key at 12:47 a.m. The door creaked open on rusted hinges. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of old leather and something else, something that made his stomach clench. Inside, shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Each shelf held items that had never made it to the main floor. Items that came with their own rules. The customer had been specific. Third shelf, red box, brass corners. Marcus found it exactly where she said it would be. The box was heavier than it looked, warm to the touch despite the freezing air. When he lifted it, something shifted inside with a wet, sliding sound. That's when he noticed the other boxes were breathing. Marcus backed toward the door, clutching the red box. But the breathing stopped. All at once, complete silence. Then the whispers started. Not from the boxes, from the red container in his hands. "Marcus," it said in a voice like grinding glass. "You shouldn't have come here." His phone buzzed. A text from the customer. "Change of plans. Keep the box. Consider it payment for your discretion." The whispers grew louder. More voices joining the first. Men, women, children, all saying his name, all begging him to open the box. Marcus ran. He slammed the back room door and turned the lock, but he could still hear them through the walls, calling his name, promising him things. The red box sat on the counter, innocent as a jewelry case. Marcus stared at the brass corners, remembering what old Pete had told him on his first day. Some customers don't want to buy things, son. They want to get rid of them. His fingers traced the latch. The whispers promised him everything he'd ever wanted. But the real horror hadn't even begun. The clock struck midnight when Marcus heard the chanting from the back room. Rule 7 had always been clear. Never enter the storage area after closing. But the voices weren't supposed to be there. He pressed his ear against the cold metal door. 3 distinct voices, speaking in a language that made his teeth ache. The smell of burning sage mixed with something else, something that reminded him of roadkill in August heat. Marcus had worked at Sunset Pond for 6 months. He'd followed every strange rule without question. Don't look directly at the mirrors after 11 p.m. Never count the cash drawer twice. Always leave the radio on static between 2 and 3 a.m. But this wasn't in the manual. The chanting grew louder. Through the keyhole, he glimpsed flickering candlelight dancing across cardboard boxes. Shadows moved in patterns that hurt to follow. His phone buzzed. A text from his manager, Vincent. "Did you lock up properly?" Marcus typed back, "Yes, but there are people inside." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "No, there aren't." The chanting stopped. Silence pressed against Marcus's eardrums like deep water. The fluorescent lights above hummed their usual tune, but now it sounded like screaming. He tried the door handle, locked from the inside. Impossible. There was no other way in or out of storage. He checked the building himself, room by room, just like Rule 12 demanded. His breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost began forming on the security monitors. Then he heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Moving toward the door from inside. Marcus backed away, his sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. The footsteps stopped directly behind the door. A voice whispered through the metal. "Marcus!" It sounded like Vincent. But Vincent had left hours ago. Marcus had watched him drive away in his rusted Honda. The door handle turned. Marcus ran for the front exit, fumbling with his keys. Behind him, the storage door creaked open. Cold air rushed through the shop like a winter wind, carrying the stench of decay and burnt offerings. He burst onto the Las Vegas Strip, gasping. Neon lights blazed around him, but they felt dim compared to whatever had been brewing in that back room. His phone buzzed again. Vincent. Rule 13. Some doors should never be opened. You'll understand tomorrow. But Marcus was already running, leaving his job and the cursed pawn shop behind, or so he thought. The basement stairs groaned under my weight as I descended into darkness. My flashlight beam cut through air thick with dust and something else. Something metallic, like old blood mixed with copper pennies. Rule number 7 had been crystal clear. Never enter the vault alone. But Marcus was gone. The police had taken him 3 hours ago, and I was the only one left with the combination. The vault door stood before me like a monument to secrets. Solid steel, painted black, with scratches around the lock that looked almost desperate, like fingernails dragging across metal. I spun the dial. 13, 29, 66. The lock clicked open with a sound like breaking bones. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of old leather and something rotten. My breath misted in the sudden chill as I stepped inside. Shelves lined the walls, floor to ceiling. But these weren't filled with jewelry or electronics like upstairs. These held jars. Hundreds of glass jars, each one labeled with dates going back decades. Some contained what looked like teeth. Others held hair tied with ribbon. A few contained things I couldn't identify in the dim light. Things that moved when my flashlight passed over them. In the center of the vault sat a leather ledger, thick as a phone book. The cover was worn smooth by countless hands. I opened it with trembling fingers. The first entry was dated 1987, Sarah Chen, age 23. Wedding ring, 14K gold. Payment, 3 years of happiness. Delivered as promised. My stomach dropped as I flipped through page after page of similar entries. Names, ages, items pawned. But the payments weren't money. Michael Torres, age 35. Guitar, vintage Martin. Payment, his daughter's safety. Contract fulfilled. Rebecca Walsh, age 41. Diamond necklace. Payment, her husband's love. Terms satisfied. Every transaction was signed in the same flowing handwriting. The same signature that appeared on my employment contract upstairs, Mr. Goldstein's signature. I heard footsteps on the stairs above me. Slow, deliberate steps that echoed through the basement like a countdown. The vault door began to swing shut behind me. In the dying light from upstairs, I saw one final entry in the ledger. Fresh ink, still wet, David Morrison, age 28. Employment contract, payment, his soul, collection pending. And that was my name. My age. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, but when I looked up, it wasn't Mr. Goldstein standing in the doorway. The first rule violation happened on a Tuesday. Marcus watched through the security monitors as Detective Sarah Chen entered the shop at exactly 3:17 a.m. The motion sensors should have triggered the alarm system. They didn't. She moved like she owned the place. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rows of pawned jewelry, electronics, and forgotten dreams that lined our shelves. But she wasn't here for the merchandise. Chen walked straight to the back office. To the vault we weren't supposed to acknowledge existed. Her fingers traced the hidden panel behind the Elvis commemorative plate, the one only 3 people in Vegas knew about. The metal groaned as the secret door slid open. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. Rule 7 was absolute. No law enforcement after midnight. Ever. The consequences weren't just termination. They were permanent. Inside the vault, Chen's flashlight revealed what the morning shift never saw. Rows of safety deposit boxes that didn't officially exist. Items that had been lost from evidence lockers across the city. Jewelry from unsolved murders. Cash from raids that never made it to the precinct. But Chen wasn't shocked by the corruption. She was adding to it. Marcus's hands trembled as he reached for the emergency phone. The number that connected directly to our real employers, the ones who made the rules, the ones who enforced them. But as Chen closed the vault and turned toward the exit, she looked directly into the security camera. Her smile was cold, predatory. She knew she was being watched. She wanted to be seen. The phone in Marcus's hand began to ring before he could dial. "We know," a voice whispered through the static. "She's been working for us longer than you have." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the monitors as Chen disappeared into the neon-soaked Las Vegas night. Every rule he'd memorized, every boundary he'd respected, every line he'd refused to cross. It was all an illusion. The real game had layers he'd never imagined, and now he was trapped in the middle of it. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the realization that he'd been a pawn in someone else's chess game. The worst part was the envelope Chen had left on his desk, the one with his daughter's school photo paper-clipped to the front. The basement felt colder than death itself. I followed Marcus down stone steps that shouldn't exist beneath a Vegas pawn shop. Each footfall echoed like a heartbeat in a tomb. The air tasted of copper and centuries-old secrets. The rules weren't made by my grandfather, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the dripping somewhere in the darkness. They're older, much older. Flickering candlelight revealed walls covered in symbols I'd never seen before. Not Egyptian, not Latin, something that predated civilization itself. The stone felt warm under my trembling fingers, pulsing like living flesh. Las Vegas sits on sacred ground, Marcus continued, his shadow dancing against ancient carvings. The Paiute knew it. The Spanish missionaries feared it, and when the city rose from the desert, something had to contain what was already here. He stopped before a massive stone tablet, its surface black as obsidian. Golden veins ran through it like frozen lightning. The symbols seemed to shift in the candlelight, rearranging themselves into new configurations. Every pawn shop in this city is a guardian post, he said. We're not just buying and selling trinkets. We're keeping the barriers intact. My throat felt raw with dust and terror. Barriers against what? Marcus traced one of the symbols with his finger. The stone hummed, a frequency that made my bones ache. Against what sleeps beneath the neon, what feeds on desperation and broken dreams. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in visible puffs as Marcus continued his revelation. Rule 1 exists because mirrors show more than reflections here. Rule 7 protects us from items that remember their previous owner's sins. And Rule 13... He paused, his hand shaking against the stone. Rule 13 keeps us from becoming the very thing we're guarding against. I thought of Mrs. Chen's desperate eyes when she pawned her wedding ring, of the teenager who traded his grandfather's watch for drug money, of every broken soul who'd walked through our doors. The city feeds on human weakness, Marcus said, and we're the ones who make sure it doesn't get too hungry. Suddenly, the symbols on the tablet began glowing with an inner fire. The humming grew louder, more insistent. Something was waking up. Marcus grabbed my arm, his grip iron tight. We need to leave. Now. But as we turned toward the stairs, I heard it. A sound like grinding stone and ancient hunger stirring in the depths below. Something had been listening to every word. The basement beneath Goldstein's pawn erupted into chaos. Marcus pressed his back against the cold stone wall. The ancient symbols carved into the rock pulsed with sickly green light. Each pulse sent waves of nausea through his stomach. The collectors had found them. 3 figures in expensive suits descended the narrow stairs. Their faces were wrong. Too smooth, too pale. Like porcelain masks hiding something rotten underneath. You cannot stop what has already begun, the lead collector whispered. His voice echoed from multiple directions at once. Sarah clutched the obsidian mirror, the one item that could seal the gateway forever. Her hands trembled as she held it above the swirling vortex in the floor. The vortex had grown. What started as a dinner plate was now wide enough to swallow a car. Dark shapes moved in its depths, things that had been waiting centuries to crawl back into our world. The rules exist for a reason, Marcus shouted over the howling wind that poured from the gateway. Every item that passes through this shop feeds that thing. The temperature plummeted. Marcus's breath came out in sharp, white puffs. Ice crystals formed on the walls. The first collector lunged forward with inhuman speed. Marcus grabbed a Civil War bayonet from the weapons rack. The metal burned cold against his palm. He swung wildly as the creature's fingers, too long, too sharp, raked across his shoulder. Pain exploded down his arm. Warm blood soaked through his shirt. Sarah stepped toward the vortex. The obsidian mirror caught the green light and threw it back in twisted patterns. If I drop this, it seals forever. But I'll go down with it. There has to be another way. Marcus drove the bayonet into the second collector's chest. It shrieked and dissolved into black smoke. The third collector circled them like a predator. Its smile revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. The mirror requires a willing sacrifice, it hissed. Someone must choose to fall. Someone must feed the seal with their life force. The gateway pulsed stronger. Tentacles the size of tree trunks began pushing through from the other side. The smell of sulfur and decay filled the air. Sarah looked at Marcus. Tears streamed down her face. I know what I have to do. She raised the mirror high above her head. Then the lights went out completely. The basement beneath Goldstein's pawn stretched deeper than any building permit would allow. Marcus descended the narrow stairs, each step echoing against concrete walls that sweated with decades of Vegas heat. The smell hit him first. Copper. Salt. Something else he couldn't name. 12 candles formed a perfect circle on the floor. In the center sat an ornate wooden box, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the flickering light. Marcus had seen it upstairs 3 days ago. A woman had pawned it for $200, tears streaming down her face. Rule 17. Mr. Goldstein whispered from the shadows. Some items require preparation before they can be sold. Marcus's hands trembled as he approached the circle. The box was warm to the touch, despite the basement's chill. Through the wood, something moved. Something alive. What's inside? Marcus asked, though part of him already knew he didn't want the answer. Memories, Goldstein replied. Pain, regret. The woman who brought this, she'd been carrying it for 30 years, since her daughter disappeared. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Marcus's breath formed clouds as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed silk, lay a child's bracelet. Silver. Delicate. The moment Marcus touched it, images flooded his mind. A little girl. Blonde pigtails. Running through the Bellagio fountains while her mother watched from a bench. Then darkness. Screaming. Hands reaching from shadows. The bracelet holds her final moments, Goldstein explained, his voice barely audible. Every item that enters this shop carries something. Most carry hope. Some carry dreams. But this... Marcus dropped the bracelet back into the box, but the visions continued. He saw the mother, younger, frantically searching casino floors, police reports, dead ends, years of wondering. Why did she bring it here? Marcus gasped. Because she finally wants to forget. But forgetting requires a price. The memory must be transferred, absorbed, made part of something else. Goldstein stepped into the candlelight and Marcus saw his eyes for the first time. They were completely black, not brown, not dark blue, black as the space between stars. That's where you come in, Marcus. Every pawnshop needs a keeper. Someone to hold the memories that others can't bear. The candles flickered once, then burned brighter. But I need to know you're ready for the responsibility. Marcus looked down at his hands. They were no longer his own. But the real horror hadn't even begun. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like dying insects as I counted the protection money for the third time. My hands trembled against the cold metal of the cash register. $15,000. Every month. Same amount. The smell of old leather and desperation clung to everything in Mickey's pawn. But tonight, it mixed with something else. Fear, raw and metallic, like blood in your mouth after a hard punch. Rule 7 had been clear from day one. When the Torino family comes collecting, you pay without question. No receipts, no records, no witnesses. I'd watched Mickey follow this rule for 18 months. Watched him hand over stacks of cash with shaking fingers. Watched the color drain from his face every third Thursday when their black Escalade pulled up outside. But Mickey was gone now. Disappeared 3 weeks ago after breaking Rule 12. Now it was just me. And them. The door chime rang like a funeral bell. Vincent Torino stepped inside, his expensive shoes clicking against the cracked linoleum. Behind him, 2 shadows in tailored suits. Their eyes swept the shop like predators, marking territory. "Evening, kid." Vincent's voice was silk wrapped around a razor blade. "Mickey left you quite the inheritance, didn't he?" The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My breath came out in small puffs as I reached for the envelope beneath the register. The money felt heavier than it should have. Each bill soaked in the sweat of honest people who'd pawned their wedding rings and family heirlooms. "This covers this month," I whispered, sliding the envelope across the scarred wooden counter. Vincent didn't touch it. Instead, he smiled. The kind of smile that made your skin crawl. "See? That's where you're wrong, kid." He leaned forward, his cologne mixing with the shop's musty air. Mickey's debt wasn't just monthly payments. He owed us something else, something he promised to deliver before he disappeared. My stomach dropped like a stone through ice water. The Castellano collection. Mickey told us he had it. Told us it was hidden somewhere in this little museum of broken dreams. Vincent's eyes glittered in the harsh light. Antique jewelry worth $2 million. Stolen from our family 60 years ago. The shop felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in like a coffin. "I don't know anything about stolen jewelry," I managed. Vincent's smile widened. "Then you better start learning fast, kid, because you've got 72 hours to find it." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "Oh, and kid," Mickey thought he could run too. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like dying insects. "I'm training Marcus, the new guy. Fresh-faced, eager. He doesn't know about the basement yet. First rule," I tell him, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Never open anything that comes in after midnight." He laughs. "Come on, man. It's just a pawn shop." The smell of old leather and tarnished silver fills my nostrils. 23 years I've worked here. 23 years of following rules that make no sense until they save your life. Second rule, I continue, watching his smile fade. If someone brings in a music box that plays Fur-Elise, you refuse, no matter how much they offer. Marcus shifts uncomfortably. The temperature drops 5 degrees whenever I mention that song. Third rule, most important. I lean closer, my breath fogging in the sudden cold. Never, ever go into the basement alone after the sun sets. His eyes dart toward the basement door. The heavy oak barrier that's been painted over so many times, the wood underneath has forgotten its original color. "What's down there?" he whispers. I remember asking the same question 23 years ago, before I learned that some knowledge comes with a price. Items that didn't sell, I say carefully. Items that chose to stay. The brass bell above the door chimes. A woman enters, clutching a small wooden box. Her fingers are stained with something dark. Marcus steps forward. "Can I help you?" I grab his arm. The box is humming, faintly, a melody I recognize. "We're closed," I tell. Her, my voice cracking like old parchment. She smiles. Her teeth are too white, too sharp, but I have something special, something that belonged to my grandmother. The box opens slightly. 3 notes escape, clear as crystal bells. "Fur-Elise." Marcus looks at me, confusion painting his features. He doesn't understand yet. The rules aren't suggestions. They're shields against the darkness that seeps through the cracks of this city. Las Vegas never sleeps, but some things should. The woman's smile widens. It's been in my family for generations. Surely you can make an exception. I think about all the exceptions made before me. All the guardians who bent the rules just once. Their names are carved in the basement walls now. In a world where everything has a price, who decides what's too valuable to sell? Some doors should never be opened. Some melodies should never be heard. Subscribe if you dare to learn what happens when the rules are broken. The new kid arrived on a Tuesday. Fresh-faced, eager. Just like I was 6 months ago. His name was Marcus, 22, college dropout. Needed the money. I watched him sign the employment papers, the same ones I'd signed, the same ones that bound me to this place. So what are the rules? He asked, adjusting his tie. I almost laughed. Almost. Rule 1, I began, my voice steady. Never ask where the items come from. He nodded, scribbling notes. Rule 2, the back room is off limits after midnight. Why? I paused. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the same lights that had witnessed everything. You'll understand soon enough. Rule 3, Rule 4, Rule 5, each one more twisted than the last. Each one designed to break you down, piece by piece. Marcus listened intently, just like I had. But here's what I didn't tell him. Here's what no one told me. The rules aren't about the pawn shop. They're about us, the employees, the ones who stay too long. I led him to the back office, showed him the employee handbook, watched his eyes widen as he read the fine print. This can't be legal, he whispered. Legal. I smiled. Marcus, we stopped caring about legal a long time ago. The truth hit me then, like a sledgehammer to the chest. I wasn't training him to work here. I was training him to replace me. Every employee who'd come before me had done the same thing. Trained their replacement. Passed on the curse. The cycle never breaks. Marcus would learn the rules. Follow them. Until they consumed him. Until he became like me. Hollow. Empty. Desperate for escape. And then he'd train the next one. The pawn shop doesn't just buy and sell objects. It collects souls. I handed him the keys. Felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Your shift starts tomorrow, I said. As I walked toward the door, I heard him call out. Wait. What about Rule 24? I stopped, turned around, smiled. Rule 24 is simple, Marcus. The neon sign flickered outside, casting red shadows on his face. There is no escape. The door slammed shut behind me. But here's the real question, the one that keeps me awake at night. In a world where everyone's desperate to sell their past for quick cash, who's really running the show? Subscribe if you dare to find out. Some stories never truly end.